Hi everyone, welcome to our small footprint. My name is Nyssa, and if you're new here, we are a family of 8 who live off-grid in Australia. Today's video is one of my food prep videos. So a little bit of a spiel for anyone who's coming in. We are, as I said, a family of 8, and we live about 4 hours away from where I do my major shopping. We're about 30 minutes from a small town that has an RGA and a Foodworks, about an hour and a half from Toowoomba, which has some of the bigger shopping centres like Coles and Woolworths and things like that as well, and then about 3.5 to 4 hours from Brisbane, which is where I go for my groceries. I have chosen to do this because it is more efficient for us, for me to go less often further away, to be able to access fruit and veggie stores and Costco and things like that. And I also do a lot of other things while I'm there. So I'll browse Marketplace and things like that and pick up any stuff off the Marketplace that I might want to grab that happens to be in Brisbane, and go to Kmart and Bunnings and all those sorts of things as well. So for us, it works better to do less often further away than to do it closer. Now, when I first started sharing on YouTube, everyone loves seeing a grocery haul, so I always share those, but there was lots of questions about how we make it work, how we make the food last, how we make doing 6 weekly shop work. And so what I was doing was I was doing daily videos that showed what I was doing with the food every day post the 6-week grocery haul. As the seasons have changed and timing has changed, I have found that all a bit too much work. So what I was doing was condensing a few days and doing a few days at a time. I have been quite slack this month. This is only, I think, the third meal prep video that I'm getting out, and I'm already going shopping again next week. So this is a shorter period as well. It's only a 4-week grocery period instead of a 6-week because of Christmas. So just to get timing right, to be able to get a shop in just before Christmas to get anything that I want that's fresh for Christmas or any last minute gifts and things like that, I had to make them 4 weeks apart instead of 6 because it just wasn't going to work otherwise. I also didn't want to end up there like Christmas Eve or anything. I wanted to have a little bit of a difference. So it's mid-November and mid-December that I'm going to end up there, so a week and a half before Christmas, I think. 10 days I get there, something like that. So I've been a bit slack with doing the food prep videos this month just because lead into Christmas, we are finishing up some revision and stuff in the homeschool work, all revision for the year, so that we take December off book work. We don't do any book work in December. We still do plenty of homeschool related tasks. Like we still discuss things all the time. We still do cooking. They're still suggested to read. We do a lot of baking. We do a lot of Christmas crafts, and some of those Christmas crafts are downloaded from education sites and things like that. So there's learning within the scope of that as well. But we don't have strict scheduled book work in December because it's just a really busy month. So we've starting to hit the stride in the garden as well, and that always takes a lot of time to get established. Then we have a little bit of a lull over the December-January period where we're just doing maintenance, but most things aren't coming abundantly out of the garden just yet because it's a bit later than that we get huge harvests, generally speaking. But we've changed our whole garden structure this year, so if you want to check that out, there's videos. I'm doing weekly videos on garden updates and stuff, and we already have fruit on a bunch of tomato plants and things like that, so who knows how it's going to go this year. But generally speaking, we take December off book work, and that means that there's lots of changes at the moment. There's lots of, as I said, revisionary stuff happening so that we finish stuff before the end of the year, and making sure that we covered what the goals were to cover for this year. There's the establishing the gardens and all that sort of stuff as well. And it's hot. The heat always causes problems. Not only does it affect my health a little bit, but it just makes you you get up earlier because it's hot, and you go to bed and you have showers later and stuff, which means that you're showering a lot closer to bedtime, so there's less free time after that. And then in the middle of the day, there's quite a few hours where you just can't do much because it's just too hot. So we have sort of siesta type sort of spans, but that makes it feel like you're losing time in a day as well. Anyway, all that to say, that was quite a squirrel there, is that this is, I think it's part 3 of October, and there may only be one more, but I do have a What We Eat in a Week going for you because everyone always enjoys them, and I'm going to try and do some planning for the grocery videos because I have to do some planning for the next 2 shops because we're in the lead up to Christmas. I also am going to do a bit of a Q&A type sort of a re-intro sort of a video for all the people who've come in and haven't caught up on the story of what's happening, and if you have any questions. But I might get you to put those questions on the weekly garden video, so I can keep a list of them, and then I might try and get that done on Thursday morning when I'm in Brisbane. Because I stay at my mum's on the Thursday morning, it's a nice quiet atmosphere, so I can just sit there and chat to the camera and try and answer those things. So see how we go, but that's the plan at the moment. So let's get into the food prep, planning, preserving, meal prep, all that sort of stuff, which happened after the 6 week, well, it was a 4 week, 6 week, monthly October grocery haul. So the first thing I started off on was one of the pork roasts. Now we buy at least 2 of these every shop. They're a versatile piece of meat that we can do all sorts of things with, and they're only $7.99 a kilo or $6.99 a kilo if you buy a case, which has 3 of them in there. I don't always buy it by the case because we just don't always need 3 of them, and then to make sure we get through it and make sure it's used. And I'm big on making sure that things are going to get used appropriately, not buying it for the sake of buying it. So it doesn't work out economic to save that $1 per kilo to buy 3 if I don't have a use for the 3, or if I don't think I'm going to have time to use the 3. So we bought 2 this month, $7.99 a kilo. They're around about 7 kilos each, around about $50 per roast. We do a lot of stuff with them. Sometimes I mince them and use them for sausage rolls or pork buns, dumplings, gyoza, breakfast sausage patties, sausage and gravy with roasted potatoes, breakfast burritos with scrambled eggs. There's many choices of things to do with them. But one of our favorite ways to eat them is as a smoked roast. So we slice a chunk off, we cut the rind off the roast. We tend to use that rind to cook over potatoes. So we slice the rind off, leaving a little layer of fat on the roast and on the rind. We slice the rind up into strips, and then in the cast iron baking trays we fill them with potatoes. We put the rind over the top of it, and then we cook it at a nice high heat, and all that lard renders out of the crackling. You get nice crispy crackling, but you also get all that lard in the bottom, which is what your potatoes are cooking in, which is just amazing. So we do that regularly. And then any leftover lard in the bottom we put into a dirty fat jar, is what we call it. It's the fat that tastes like pork that we use for cooking in for the next few days, and has to be stored in the fridge and stuff because it's not rendered appropriately. So today I cut the roast in half. I took the rind off both pieces. I cut one half into big large chunks. I hadn't really decided what I was doing with it yet, but it needed to be just, put back in the fridge in a manner that I could use it. The other half I left in a 1 roast piece. So I retied up the elastics that came with the roast. I covered the roast with Dijon mustard. We enjoy the flavour of the mustard, but it also helps the roast to retain moisture while smoking by having that layer of mustard. On top of the mustard, I put a dry rub. Now, I don't always measure my pork or my chicken rubs. I can be a bit lazy and do it by eye. But I have shared my ratios before that I worked from originally, and I really do need to get these sorts of things up on the website so that not only I can reference them, but you guys can as well. I do a mix of raw sugar, a drizzle of molasses, which ends up being brown sugar. We just don't buy brown sugar. Smoked paprika, some onion powder, garlic powder, salt and pepper. I will add a mustard powder to that depending on what it's being used for, as well as sometimes adding other flavors depending. Like if I'm smoking a corned beef, then it has a pastrami-esque kind of a flavor to it. It's higher ratio of pepper than the sweet and smoky rub. I don't think I'd put any sugar in the pastrami rub. And so the mustard powder goes in if you're not putting a mustard rub on something. So if I'm not using a mustard rub on the chicken, then I'll just use mustard powder in the dry rub and things like that. So it is adaptable for whatever purpose you're going to use it. This goes in the smoker at about 150 Celsius for as long as it takes. I put a probe in the thickest part of the roast. I cook it until it hits an internal temperature of 64 Celsius, which is a medium rare for pork. That's the way we like to cook these roasts that we're slicing. At that temperature, it's a very luscious, easy to slice, melt in your mouth kind of a sliced roast meat. Once that was in the smoker, I got started on the other batch of mango cordial that I had left to steep overnight at the end of the last video. So I started off by straining the seeds and the skins out of the liquid, doing it in batches like I always do, pouring it into the colander, squishing it around, because we are aiming for bits of pulp in this one to increase that mango flavour. But this colander is a rigid colander, so it's very sturdy, so you can sort of push the seeds against it, and because it's so rigid it will allow you to scrape the flesh into the thing underneath, but it has quite small holes, so you're not getting huge pieces. You're getting very finely grated, I suppose, pieces through that rigid colander. So I just keep slowly straining it into the pot. I just do it batch by batch, slowly mixing around, tipping off any of the excess flesh and seeds into a scrap bowl as needed if I need more room in the colander and things like that. Once it was all strained, I added some frozen lime rings as well as sugar. Now, I started out just adding the 2 kilo bag of sugar. We've discussed it before on most videos, but just in case you're new here, I'll reiterate about it. Cordial recipes normally have a 1-to-1 sugar ratio. You cook off your fruit or whatever, strain it, and the juice that's left, you do the same weight of juice as sugar. This is too sweet for us. It's not the way that we like to use it. We also find some fruits are far sweeter than others, so you don't require as much sugar, and we like that tang of it being not too sweet sometimes too. With this mango lime one, we're going for a tart, a bit like there's a Tahitian lime mineral water that we have been known to buy on occasion at the supermarket. IGA sells it, I think Woolworths does as well, and it's a really tart soft drink. Yeah, it's lime and it's tart. So that's what we're aiming for with this one. So I added a good amount of citric acid in it, as well as a couple of teaspoons of tartaric. Again, because I don't follow a recipe, I use both these acids in my cordials to help preserve it once it's on the shelf. Tartaric acid helps to stop fermentation, and citric acid is a preservative, like adding lemon juice or whatever else. Now, I've added lime and everything to this, so realistically it's probably acidic enough, but the citric acid is going to give it that little sort of a mouth pinch tart flavor, but it also is just an extra to make me feel comfortable about the fact that I didn't measure anything else. I dissolved the sugar and then put the lid on it and put it aside to cool slightly so that it's more easily handleable to put in the jars. I also removed the lime rings once everything was dissolved, so I don't get too much bitterness from the pith that is attached to those lime rings. After that, it was time to bottle it. So I'm using the passata jars as per normal for me. This is my standard jar that I use for my cordial. We just filled the jars as per normal. This will have quite a bit of mango flesh in it, but mango pulp is quite tolerable in cordial. It's very soft and it tends to be barely noticeable. Or it sinks to the bottom of the soda water and you can leave it behind if that's what you want to. But to remove too much of it is going to remove too much flavour, because we want that mango flavour coming through. I filled all the jars, did the normal, cleaned the rims with white vinegar, put the lug lids on nice and firmly. I processed them in my Buffalo pressure canner, using it as a steam canner again. As I've said, my steam canner is too short to fit the passata bottles in, but water bathing them takes a lot of water and it takes a lot of time to get that much water up to a boil. So being able to steam can them in my pressure canner is ideal. I'm sure I've got a video somewhere that talks about steam canning in a pressure canner. I'll try and find it and link it, but I really suck at doing that. So ask me in the comments if you want something specific and I'll try and find it. I do try and answer nearly all the comments, but I have been a bit slack lately. This is what the port looks like after it has reached its internal temperature and then has been allowed to rest under foil for 15 minutes or so. It's so easy to cut into really nice thin slices. It's melt in your mouth tender. Definitely the favourite way for us to do pork roast these days, and we eat this in many ways, on flatbreads, just with gravy and vegetables, all sorts of things. It's just really tasty. The next day I got moving on the rest of the pork that I had left in big chunks. I decided to turn it into pulled pork. That way we could use it in a myriad of ways. And I think that night I actually made dairy-free mac and cheese, and that we had it with, but I don't seem to have filmed it. But mac and cheese with pulled pork is delicious. And I make big trays of the mac and cheese so that we can have leftovers for a couple of days too. So, that's always good. It can be served as a side with something else, or just heated up and eaten as a meal again on its own. So I basically dry rubbed the pork with the same mix of spices I used on the roast. The smoked paprika, garlic, onion, mustard powder, salt, pepper, bit of raw sugar and molasses. Get each piece nice and coated, and then I put it in the bottom of my pressure cooker, which is my Buffalo cooker canner. I use the Buffalo because it's stainless steel. The Presto is aluminium, so I don't cook anything with an acid base in it like this is. But the Buffalo is overly large for this kind of thing. I do need to buy myself just a small stainless steel pressure cooker at some point. But for the moment, I just need to be aware that things can burn on the bottom because it takes so long to reach pressure in such a large cavity. A smaller one would take a lot less time to come to pressure and wouldn't heat the bottom of the pan quite so badly in the process of doing it. I put all the pork in, a jar of chicken stock and a jar of our plum barbecue sauce. I mixed it up a bit and turned it on. I made sure to bring the pressure up slowly so the base of the pan didn't get so hot that it scorched, though I do find that it's kind of inevitable using a barbecue sauce, which is a sweet based sauce, in a pot this size to get it up to temperature and to pressure. I'm going to get a little bit of scorching, but I'm aware of it and I try and reduce it as much as possible, and at some point I'll invest in one of those small stovetop stainless steel pressure canners. I went looking a while back, but there was a lot of aluminium ones and I'd like a stainless steel one and I couldn't decide. I cooked it for about 60 minutes at pressure, and then once it was done, it was this lovely fall apart meat. Now, being a shoulder, it's definitely drier than, say, like a butt or something, but with the added sauce in the stock, it's still very good. It's definitely a toothier mouthfeel. It's slightly chewy, it's less fall apart in your mouth, but the meat still falls apart into the strands nicely, just like a pulled pork, which works well for anything that you would use pulled pork for. It freezes up in portions in vacuum seal bags too for use later in the month, super quick to defrost and use in wraps or pasta or anything else that you want to use it for. Next day, I had to get through the rest of the chicken as it was coming up to its best before date. I feel like I haven't used as much meat this month so far, and that I've ended up with a lot to be processed before before date instead of already having been cooked, but some months are just different in the scope of tasks required and time allowed for the kitchen, and depends on how much food I had left over from the month before that we're still eating through and things like that. So this month I still had quite a few trays of chicken that I hadn't cooked into anything before it hit the best before date. The best before dates sometimes are awfully quick too, like sometimes it's a week, sometimes it's 3 days. It really just depends on the dates on the food that I'm buying. So anyway, the first thing I did was to fillet the couple packets of chicken breasts that I had. I tend to use the breast for things like green curry, sometimes for like a faux KFC chicken or crumb chicken that's cooked in a pan, things like that. I don't use breast meat as much as I use thighs, but there are some things I prefer it for. I definitely like it in a curry, like a Thai curry and things like that. I definitely prefer breast meat for that, but most of the time we go for thighs. I do like the whole breasts smoked. I haven't done it in a while. I probably should do it again, where I coat them in basically the same sort of rub as I do the pork, the whole breasts in the rub, and then I put the whole breasts onto the racks in the smoker, and I smoke like 4 trays of breasts all at once, and then once they've cooled I slice them really nice and thin, and they're great as sausage, as sandwich meat, as with pasta. Or that smoked chicken flavor is really lovely and the texture is really nice. I haven't done that in a while, but I should do that again maybe next month. We'll see how we go. But for today, all I did was fillet all the chicken breasts and then split them up into 1 kilo-ish portions in vacuum sealed bags and seal them up. Darryl was actually on the other side of the bench with the vacuum sealer, so I handed him the chicken and he split and sealed it up for me. So I just filleted it into thinner pieces. It defrosts easier that way and is versatile to use however I want to use it. And then it goes 1-ish kilo. I think it might have been 1.2 kilo bags, ended up being like 4 bags out of the 2 trays or whatever it was. So he split it up evenly for me and we got it into the freezer. I also cut up the last 2 trays of thighs. I don't seem to have footage of cutting them up, but you've all seen it before, but I basically lay them out and cut them into strips. I find that it's the easiest way to cook them if we're not having them as whole thighs. It cooks nice and quickly, and the smaller pieces go further than the whole thighs. So if we're having a meal with whole thighs and we cook it up, then you tend to have a whole thigh each, whereas if I slice them all up, we tend to eat less overall because it's in smaller pieces. I don't know why it works that way, but it does. So some of it I'm turning into our new favorite fried chicken that I said I would share. So this is how we do it. I make a batter up. So I start with about 2 cups of kefir or buttermilk. Then I add a couple of eggs, some garlic powder and smoked paprika and salt. Keep in mind that this is like the 4th time that I've made it already this month, so I'm going by eye here with a lot of these seasonings. But it's one I'll work out actual measurements on so I can share it because it's a firm favorite now. So I'll make it more than enough to be able to figure out exactly what ratio we use. Then I add flour until I get the right consistency of the batter. Again, I'll calculate how much I use, but it's going to be dependent on the consistency of your kefir or your buttermilk and the size of your eggs as well. Whisk it all up. I want it thick enough that we get some of those folds in the batter or crumbing so that we get those crispy bits, but not so thick that you get chunks of batter. You don't want it to taste like battered chicken. It's supposed to be crumb chicken. The batter is just what holds the crumb in place. So you don't want to have that batter when you bite into it. It wants to be thin enough to be crunchy and flaky. I err on the side of thicker because I can always thin the batter out quite easily. So I tend to start off a little bit thicker and then I'll add a bit more liquid if need be. I tipped the cut up chicken thighs in and mixed it up because this is going to thin it out a little too from the moisture in the chicken. Now we're just going to put that aside to sit for 15 minutes. When I was doing the buttermilk marinade, I was leaving it for 24 hours with just the buttermilk, but because this is more of a batter with eggs and stuff, we're getting the same flavors because it's thicker, it's sticking to the chicken more, but it doesn't require that planning ahead, I suppose. So we're really enjoying being able to just do this on a whim. With the rest of the chicken thighs, I did my standard favorite way to do them. I marinated it in cowboy candy, smoked paprika, garlic powder, salt, onion and pepper. This is just our standard mix, and I do have ratios for this, but again, I do it by eye a lot because I'm not measuring the chicken, and you can kind of tell by the color of the chicken at the end of the blending as to whether it's got enough seasoning or not. I put that aside just to mellow and marinate a bit. If you don't have cowboy candy, I would use lemon juice for some acidity and olive oil for some moisture, but I purposely make my cowboy candy quite liquidy because I use it as a marinade a lot. So I can it in small jars. I use the pesto jars a lot, which are 190 mils, and I dice up my peppers really small so that there's lots of floating, but free floating in liquid, and I will use a whole jar in like a few kilos of this chicken to marinate it, or if I'm making sausages, I use a whole lot in that. So I like to make it thin for that purpose because I know that that's what I use it for. We also use it to flavor our mayo, so having it nice and thin to pour a couple of teaspoons into our mayo is handy for that as well. I mixed up a seasoned flour mix for the buttermilk chicken, sort of buttermilk chicken, kind of. Flour, smoked paprika, garlic, salt and pepper, much the same as what's in the batter, just on a milder level. I must not have hit record on the camera for the dipping, but I just pulled the chicken out of the batter, let the major excess drip, and then dip liberally in the flour. You want it well coated, and you want those little flaps of the batter covered in flour as well, because that's what's going to create the flaky bits of crumbing. So you want to encourage the batter to create sort of a flaky texture covered in flour, so that when it fries up you get that kind of texture. It's kind of, I don't know the science behind it or anything, but that's what you're aiming for. I'm cooking it in cold pressed vegetable oil from Costco. I really like the way it fries up, and I will need to start buying 2 bottles per shop rather than 1, as we've started frying a lot of things, and I do clean it and reuse it, but it can, when we're doing big batch like I did, I don't know, a couple of kilos worth of this chicken at once, and it does dirty the oil a lot because you're using a flour, so you're dipping the batter into a flour, and there's a lot of free floating bits of flour which burn in the bottom of the oil, so the oil can get quite dirty quite quickly, especially if you're keeping it at such a high temperature for a prolonged period to cook that much off. So I do strain it and reuse it as much as I can, but I might start buying a second bottle as well. I know that, you know, frying things more is not necessarily a good thing, but hey, it's tasty. As it comes out of the oil, it gets put on a rack to drain. I made a big batch of it because what I love about it as well is that if I flash freeze it and then stick it in bags in the freezer, then at any other time I can just pull the bag out of the freezer, put it on a rack over a tray in the oven and cook it, and it's like fresh, crunchy, crispy and moist. It is really amazing how well, I know it's because it was fried, so there's plenty of oil in the crumbing and stuff still, so when you stick it in the barbecue to bake, there's plenty of oil and fats in the crumbs that is going to then cook off and keep it nice and crispy and keep the inside nice and moist as well. This is what the rest of the chicken thighs look like as well. We just cooked this off in the other burner in stages while we were cooking the fried chicken. Darryl helped me out. You want to not overcrowd the pan, and then you get the yummy crispy caramelized bits that make it so very good. So by having nice high heat and not crowding the pan, it's gonna caramelize the edges of the chicken, because that cowboy candy has heaps of sugar in it, so that's going to caramelize. Do have to be careful. It does smoke quite a bit if the pan's quite hot because of the sugar and stuff in there, and the fumes, because it's quite spicy, the fumes can be a little harsh too, so just be aware of that when you're cooking it, especially when you're cooking it up in big batches like what I was doing. So that was the next few days, I think it's 3, maybe 4 days worth of food prep for October's grocery haul, and lots of bits and pieces in there. It has been a really sort of all over the place month. It has felt very unplanned and very just whatever has worked has worked. and I've just had to deal with however things fell, especially with trying to get this garden and stuff sorted as well. There's been a lot of time spent out here trying to get this sorted, which has limited my time in the kitchen, and the heat has changed things. It's change of seasons happens every year. You just forget how much it impacts you until it happens every year, which is hard. I know it does, but it's still, yeah. Anyway, thank you for joining me again today, guys, and I will see you hopefully with another sort of 3 or 4 videos over the next week that I need to get done before we start the next month's worth of groceries. Thanks, guys.